Shaylyn Romney Garrett is coming to us from New Hampshire. Came in last night. She is an award-winning writer. She thinks a lot about how to make change happen. The Upswing book that she co-authored with Bob Putnam has been a very popular and successful book. She has also been the co-author of American Grace, How Religion Divides and Unites Us. Shaylyn provides thought leadership on a wide range of topics, including some of the current challenges we face in this country, and speaks on a wide variety of news outlets, including NPR, PBS NewsHour, Time Magazine, New York Times. She has helped to found the organization Weave, the Social Fabric Project, and is a member of the Braver Angels Scholars Council and Citizen University Civic Collaboratory. Of particular interest to us tonight is that Shaylyn, after graduating from university at Harvard, joined the Peace Corps with her husband and was sent to Jordan. And I think you mentioned that you had to look it up on a map at the time. This was she. And spent a couple of years in Jordan observing a different culture, observing some of the challenges that were there, and inspired her and her husband to a career of social entrepreneurship, starting out in the Middle East and spending 6 years there, trying to understand what are the challenges, what are the kinds of things that the youth in Jordan and beyond need and are craving, and how do we make a difference with our limited time and capacity in a region that might seem quite foreign. She has 2 young children, recently moved to beautiful New Hampshire, not a stranger to snow, but this is her first time speaking at the Kennedy Center. So please join me in offering a warm welcome to Shaylyn.
So I feel a little short for this podium. Can you even see me? I wonder. I always hate podiums when I speak because they're usually taller than I am, and it makes me feel a little diminished, but that's okay. I hope you can see and hear me. I am grateful to be here and grateful for this opportunity that Quinn extended to me to speak about my work in the Middle East. And I also appreciate the invocation. I received that blessing offered to me very deeply in my heart, and I have to apologize because I have not spoken publicly about my work in the Middle East for many years. Because I will tell you the end from the beginning here, which is that the work that we began and did for 6 years in the Middle East ended, not in the way that we wanted it to, abruptly and not according to our plan or our timeline. And in many ways, that felt like the loss of a child. When you create something to offer to the world, you create it with your whole heart. And so this is something that's very, very close to my heart, and I'm going to try to get through this without being too emotional. I didn't recognize quite how much this was going to hit me. So bear with me. Quinn asked me to start with to answer the question of what is social entrepreneurship. And I've always thought of social entrepreneurship as using the skills that an entrepreneur would use to start a business in order to meet a social challenge. So oftentimes when you think of an entrepreneur who starts a business, usually that means that entrepreneur has identified some sort of need in society and has some idea of how they might be able to create a marketable solution to that problem or need, right? And they marshal resources and they create an offering and they bring it to the world, and hopefully it solves the problem that people have enough that they're willing to buy the product, and it grows, right? That's what we think of as business entrepreneurship. And social entrepreneurship is really the application of those same principles, but in the context of solving the world's most pressing problems. Sometimes we tend to think that it's institutions' jobs, it's the government's job to solve the world's problems. And social entrepreneurship really takes empowerment into the hands of individuals to be change makers, to be agents of creating a new world, to be agents of solving problems. And I love the idea of social entrepreneurship in that it is very empowering to the individual to create change maybe bigger than themselves, right? And the story of how I became a social entrepreneur is a little bit unexpected and haphazard. And what I wanted to do today is really just tell you that story. Because I could stand up here and say social entrepreneurship is this, and this is how you do it, and here's some tips on getting funds, and here are some pitfalls that you might find along the way, but that's probably going to be kind of a boring, disembodied way to go about this. So instead I thought I would tell you how I came to be a social entrepreneur in the Middle East of all places. So it all started with the Peace Corps. It all started with a feeling of discontent. I just shared this with the seminar group that I was with a minute ago, but in college and after college, I was living through the Bush administrations. And as many of you know, during that time, that administration engaged in a lot of actions in the world that we came around to understand weren't very good. And I felt really conflicted about that. And a lot of times when young people go to college and the curtain gets pulled back on what the role America is really playing in the world looks like, there's a lot of a growing anti-American sentiment that can happen at this age, right? Because it's like, wait a minute, this country's not what I thought it was. We don't stand for the things that we claim that we do, right? And I was beginning to feel that, and I thought, you know what, though? I think I'm going to channel this angst. I'm going to find something that I love that America is doing in the world, and I'm going to do that so that I can be an American with pride. And so we decided to do the Peace Corps, because there's a million sorts of exchange or service organizations that you could do, and we chose specifically to work for the federal government for this reason. And the Peace Corps is a little bit like going on a mission, except that you can say what your preferences are in terms of where you'd like to go. And we put things like Sub-Saharan Africa, Southeast Asia, and then the assignment came back, Jordan. And we were like, okay. And it turns out I think God really heard that prayer of my heart, because he sent us to the Middle East, the epicenter of where America, I think, had not been behaving well as a nation, as an actor in the world, and gave us the opportunity to engage in that part of the world in a different way as Americans. So my husband and I went to Jordan. And this is a picture of what some of Jordan looks like. You have so many beautiful pictures of places all over the world in this center. It's really humbling. These are not going to be that beautiful, but it'll give you a sense. So Jordan, obviously shares the Jordan River with Israel. It's a nation of about 6 million people, about half of whom are refugees. Jordan is a place where there's been subsequent waves of refugees, right? And there are Kuwaiti refugees, and then Iraqi refugees, and then there are Syrian refugees, and there are, of course, Palestinian refugees, many of whom have lived in Jordan for many generations but still call themselves refugees. So when you think of the Middle East, you often think of really well-resourced places like the Gulf. Jordan is not that place. It has very, very few natural resources, but a lot of people coming in who need things. And so basically the Jordanian economy is propped up with international aid, partly because it serves such an important purpose in kind of the United States' diplomatic agendas in the Middle East. And so this is what it looks like. It's a beautiful place. And this is also what it looks like. It's a sort of a messy, developing nation, and it's kind of a wonderful place. And we really went into the Peace Corps just to learn and just to do what we could. One thing I love about the Peace Corps is that the government negotiates agreements with different governments and says to them, what do you need? You tell us what your biggest development agenda is, and we'll identify 3 or 4 ways that we could maybe match that need with people. And the Peace Corps has this threefold mission. It's not just about going to a country to serve and meet a need, it's also about learning about the culture of that country so that you can be a better citizen of the world and better understand people outside the United States. And it's also about being an ambassador of American culture to the world. So there's this really deep two-pronged cultural exchange component, and then there's the service component as well. But generally speaking, it's determined by the host country what Peace Corps volunteers will be doing in their country. And so one of the things that Jordan asked for is youth development, and another one was English instruction. And so I became an English instructor in a government girls' school. My husband became a youth development coordinator in a public boys' youth center. And the Peace Corps is really interesting because they basically just drop you in the middle of nowhere. And so I'll never forget how humbling it was to, after 3 days in Jordan, to be dropped off with a host family in a Bedouin village. So this was a village of Bedouins that had only been one generation settled into houses, because Bedouins are a nomadic people, right? And the government of Jordan has worked really hard to get them out of their nomadic lifestyle and into houses, basically so that they can count them and make sure that their kids are educated and that they have health care, which is a mixed bag of whether that's an appropriate agenda or not. But so this is a recently settled Bedouin community who had never seen Americans in their life. We were dropped off, left in the living room of our host families, and that was it. Our host parents greeted us, and then they left the room. And we were like, I have no idea what's going on right now. I have no idea what we're doing here. We didn't speak very much Arabic. Peace Corps has an immersion language instruction program. So they drop you with a host family, and then there's 2 or 3 other volunteers that live in the same village. They hire a local 22-year-old that they call a language and cultural facilitator, who also lives in the village with you. And then you live with your host parents, and then you spend 2 or 3 hours a day in your small group learning language, and then you go back to your host parents, and you do this for 3 months, and that's how you learn the language and the culture. But oftentimes the language and cultural facilitators that they hire grew up in the capital city and don't actually have a clue about life in villages. So it's an interesting experience for all. For them, it's almost as much of a cultural immersion experience as it is for us. So it was challenging and interesting. But I have to say, we went in the Peace Corps, my husband and I, just to learn, just to be there, just to feel connected to this culture that we knew nothing about. This is a picture of where we were stationed. We were placed for training in a city called Mafraq, which is kind of on the road to Iraq. If you can imagine that part of Jordan that sort of sticks out moving toward Iraq. Mafraq is this tiny little city there, and then we were in a village outside of Mafraq. So we were kind of in the middle of nowhere. This is what our village looked like. I think that's not the home we lived in, but that might have been the home that we were using as our language instruction building. This was our neighbor Omar and his prized goat that he really wanted me to take a picture of. This house, the laundry that you see on the line is my laundry on the line. That was the home behind them that we actually lived in. And these were 2 of the young men that we got to know in that village. We really just spent countless hours sitting, drinking mint tea, eating, talking, desperately trying to learn Arabic. I can't tell you how many pounds of goat meat I consumed just trying to be, present for what the cultural habits were in Jordan. The hours I spent watching bad television and explaining that no, not everywhere in America is as violent as inner city Chicago, and spending hours sitting in the principal's office of the school that I worked in while she chain smoked and tried to build trust with her. I mean, just really, really interesting experiences. We just came with a sense of curiosity, and that's how this all began. These are 2 of the Bedouin grandmothers. These women were nomadic. It's their children that received housing from the government, these cinder block houses in the middle of nowhere. So they have their traditional tattoos, and this is a traditional Bedouin Muslim attire. They were some of the funnest and most wonderful people that we met. These are some of my students. So this is what it looked like to work in a classroom in Jordan. They're gender segregated. So I worked with girls, and they are the sweetest, most wonderful students, the brightest, most curious, funniest young people. And as our sort of undeveloped curiosity developed, we morphed into a mode of observation and careful listening. Once we could really understand the language, we began to really just observe. And we heard concerns and a deep longing for better education. We heard that Queen Rania, the Queen of Jordan, had a big agenda to improve critical thinking in the country. But in the classroom, we could see that nobody really knew what that meant. They were supposedly trained on how to do critical thinking education, and I couldn't see it anywhere that I looked. And so as we heard these longings, my husband and I knew that we had something that could speak to that need. The question was how to bring those two things together. These are some of my older students. This was in the village that we were ultimately placed in. So you do 3 months of training, and then you get a placement somewhere in the country where you are on your own. You're no longer in a group of volunteers, you're on your own. And this was in a city called Salt, which is right above the Dead Sea, and it's kind of culturally an in-between between the village life and city life. And these are some of my students there. And the pink building in the background is the school where I worked for almost 2 years. And this is a painting. This is a picture of a mural that some of my students did. And the reason that I wanted to include this in this presentation was because this mural was a turning point for me. So I think young people have this deep yearning for creative expression, right? And so a group of girls got together and they asked the principal if they could do a mural, something that would make the school prettier and brighter. And the principal said, sure. And she got them some supplies, and the girls must have spent weeks of their free time creating this mural. And it was right by the door to the school, so it really brightened things up. And then a couple of days after they finished, a rainstorm came and washed the whole thing away because they hadn't used outdoor appropriate paint. And something in me just broke when I saw this happen. I thought, this is it. This is the critical thinking that everybody's missing, right? There's all this heart for wanting to make things better and to do things differently, and the adults are trying to get in there and support it, but there are no skills for project planning, basic stuff here, right? And how discouraging is that for a 14-year-old girl to see something that she's worked on for weeks just get washed away? And I thought, this is, okay, like this is some sort of galvanizing moment where I thought, we've got to teach in some sense what we know, which is some basic ideas about how to use critical thinking, not just to pass tests, not just to be a better student, but to actually make your community better by doing projects that are important to you. You can have a great idea and you can be creative, but if you don't have those critical thinking skills, nothing that you're going to do in your community is going to succeed. And so it was really a full year of just being in Jordan before we even ventured to offer up anything to this community. And I think that's a really important step that often gets skipped. It's really easy to look at other parts of the world and say, oh, you know what they need? They need this. And I can do that. And I'm going to get in there and give it to them, right? And that feels good. And sometimes it is good, but sometimes it misses the step of really careful listening and understanding. And so we really tried hard to just be in the same space as these people before we created something that we thought might help. And so this is my husband looking really dorky with a checklist on the wall for what we ultimately decided to build, which was a summer camp that taught critical and creative thinking. And we wanted to do it very seriously. We used the best cognitive and behavioral science, but we wanted to teach it in a way that was culturally relevant. So Angela Duckworth is going to come, I think, to the forum in a little while, maybe next month. And when we were doing this work, her research was really groundbreaking. And so my husband is really tuned into all of this stuff because psychology and behavioral change is his field. And so we were bringing really the most cutting edge behavioral science in education to this far reaches of Jordan. And it wasn't like, you know what, we'll just help these people get a little bit better. We were saying, you know, if they're going to do critical thinking, they're going to do it the best way that anybody knows how. And so we created this entire curriculum that was in Arabic, that was culturally relevant, that was appropriately leveled for the students, and we called it Brain Camp. So this is a picture of the very first Brain Camp that we ever did at a public boys' school in Salt. These are all of our proud graduates. This was the first time that anyone had ever played a game in school. We created a critical thinking curriculum that was game-based, activity-based, and it was really strange to see how much it lit these kids up, to realize that learning could be fun. And that sort of lit a fire in us because it just felt like it was bringing water to a place that was parched in these kids that they didn't even know was parched, right? And that's what it felt like. And so this was really, the Brain Camp was really a labor of love. We weren't required to do this. You know, it wasn't like something that the Peace Corps told us we had to do. Most of our other volunteers were having a lot more fun than us, and we were spending all of our time, you know, huddled in around our little space heater, like coming up with ideas for how to teach this and spending all of our free time doing it. And everyone, I think, thought that we were a little bit crazy. But it was just born out of this deep love and respect for this people that we were barely coming to know, and recognizing that there was maybe something that we could offer to meet a yearning that we were seeing. So that was how it all began. And these are a couple of our students in Brain Camp. It really grew through ingenuity. If any of you opt to become a social entrepreneur, you're going to learn really fast that you have to use every available resource to get the job done. So we're in the middle of villages where there's hardly anything, hardly any supplies or materials, right? And yet somehow, with garbage that we got from the local fruit stands and the 25-cent plastic cups that we could buy in the little souk, you know, downtown, the little market, we managed to create these opportunities for growth and learning through games and through experiences that these young people had never had. And we really had to cultivate a lot of local champions and local partners, asking everyone that we met, do you run a youth center? Do you think that you'd want, you know, this? Or do you run a school? Or, you know, could we come in and do an after-school program? And slowly our opportunities to present this grew. We started off doing a summer camp, then we built a club, after-school clubs. This is an after-school club with some of my girls who always refuse to smile, those serious Jordanians. Everybody asks me what Jordanians are like, and the first word I always say is they're very serious on the outside. They're actually a lot of fun on the inside. We started training parents. So this is a parent training workshop that I did in the library of my school, training parents on how to do critical thinking at home, how to play games with their kids that were educational. The thirst that these women had for giving their children more was unbelievable. So it was a lot of hard work, and it was a lot of ingenuity, and it was a lot of sitting in people's offices, drinking cups of tea, waiting for them to trust us. But eventually the thing picked up steam, and our ingenuity and our hard work was met with serendipity, which I think all successful social entrepreneurs have an element of their story where they were just in the right place at the right time to channel the resources into what they were doing. So our first serendipitous invitation, somebody organized a TEDx event at the Dead Sea, and we were the only non-Arab speakers invited to speak there. There's a video of this online somewhere, and if you watch it, you'll see that I do the first minute in Arabic. And it was like this shocked hush comes over the crowd because they really just assumed that Americans were not even going to attempt. And so just little things like that of showing, look, I'm here and I've spent almost 2 years in your country just struggling to learn the language. This is who I am. It was amazing how much that opened people up to what we had to say. So we taught about Brain Camp and the amazing things that we were seeing in our students as they engaged with learning in an entirely different way. We also had a serendipitous experience where we met the Queen. We met Queen Rania. I love telling this story because Jordan is, I think, well, at the time, I don't know what it is now, but at the time we were there, it was the second most water poor country in the world. So water was very tightly regulated. It only flowed to your house once a week. It was stored in a tank on the roof, and when it ran out, it ran out. So you didn't shower a lot. You didn't do a lot of superfluous things with water in Jordan. So I remember we were doing this summer camp in a little, I don't know, a little community center somewhere, and I hadn't had a shower in like 3 days. And as a Peace Corps volunteer, you don't have money. I mean, for TEDx, I had to go to the used clothing market and try to find like a pair of pants that I could wear on a stage in front of 1,000 people. And I only had safety pins to try and get them to be the right length. It was, yeah. So anyway, we're at this summer camp and hadn't had a shower in 3 days, and we're doing the brain camp, and all of a sudden the entire place goes into military lockdown. Like we blink, and all of a sudden there's all these soldiers coming in. In the Middle East, that's not a really fun feeling to have, because you just never really know what's going on. And before we knew it, in walked the Queen to just visit this summer camp. And this is kind of what royalty do in the Middle East. They just sort of show up and build relationships with people by kind of coming to communities and supporting these things. And so she heard about Brain Camp, and we don't have a picture of all the interactions we had with the Queen. We never got a picture with her. Having a picture with royalty in Jordan is literally like a form of currency. Like people hang them on their walls, they carry them in their wallet. If you're in a difficult situation with the police, you just drop the fact that you work for the Queen, and everything changes. It's a different world over there in that regard. So, but we never did get a copy of our picture with the Queen. But this is a picture of us at another summer camp that she organized, and eventually she invited us to partner with her NGO to expand the reach of this program, because she had been working so hard to build awareness around critical thinking, and we had been in the villages building critical thinking programs that were actually getting traction and resonating with local people. And so we were not able to engage in that partnership as Peace Corps volunteers because we were employees of the federal government, so we couldn't partner with with a foreign national government. But we went home, raised a little bit of money, started an NGO, and that was when Think Unlimited was born. Part of what really motivated us to take this from just being a cool thing that we did in the Peace Corps to becoming a real social enterprise and a real initiative, a real nonprofit, was really just this feeling of how resonant and how relevant it was. I'll never forget in 2011, sitting in my tiny little house in Salt, overlooking the wadi that went down into the Dead Sea, and watching on my laptop screen the Arab Spring begin to unfold. And I thought, that girl is these girls. They're the same girl, right? The young people that were out there protesting in the middle of Tahrir Square were the same kids that we were working with in Jordan. And it was like all of a sudden, this critical thinking and how to work and use your skills to help your community became super relevant. And we felt compelled to do more with what we were doing because it just felt like this was the moment. And so this is really why Think Unlimited flourished. We were at the right place at the right time, meeting an expressed and felt need of the people that we were working with. And that year in 2011, Time Magazine, they choose a person of the year every year, right, to feature. And in 2011, they chose the person of the year to be the protester. It was a year of deep social unrest, mostly, happening in lots of other places, but a lot in the Arab world. And at that time, many of you are probably too young to remember this, but at that time it was completely unheard of to have these kinds of protests in the Arab world, and particularly the ones that successfully toppled governments. And so again, it just felt like there was this whole generation of 100 million Arab youth who were done and were ready for a new world, but didn't have the skills to get there. And our mission became 100 million solutions, taking young people from revolutionaries and protesters to solutionaries who could build solutions in their communities because they were equipped and empowered to do so. Anybody can protest, but not everybody can build something new in the place of what was torn down. And that was really the gap into which we were speaking. This is a picture of me with our first donation check in my mother-in-law's basement, which is where we were living at the time. So there's this part of social entrepreneurship that's very gritty, right? It's not pretty, and there's a lot of sacrifice involved, because channeling resources to something that most people don't realize is important is really hard work, and that's particularly true of the Middle East. There is a lot of philanthropic support for work with refugees in the Middle East, and we were going to donors saying, we're not working with refugees. We are working with the future leaders of this country who will themselves then solve the refugee problem. So you could give money to Americans to solve the refugee problem, or you could give money to Americans to equip a rising generation to solve the refugee problem. And that didn't fly with a lot of donors, so it was a tough road. It just took a lot of humility. We raised some money. We founded a 501c3. I filled out the 501c3 application myself with a book that I checked out of the library on how to do that. It was like the biggest celebration of my life when we were actually granted 501c3 status by the IRS, because I don't know how that happened. So this is us on the balcony of our first office, sending a thank you to our donors. And Think Unlimited was born. And it was really... most Americans who go to the Middle East are there under the auspices of the government or a major NGO or some kind of massive development organization, and we were there entirely on our own, partnering directly with NGOs, and it was hard. It was something people didn't understand, but we felt like it gave us the freedom to do things differently. And so that's what we did. We started partnering with Queen Ranya's organization to train teachers to be able to administer this brain camp program, so that it wasn't Americans coming in and teaching this, that it was teachers teaching it in the classroom. So these are just some images from those teacher trainings. In order to train these teachers, we had to take them through the curriculum itself. You can't teach kids through games and activities if you yourself have never learned through games and activities. So we have these adult male Arab Muslim men who are very serious, playing games like tangrams and set and other critical thinking, and it was a pretty amazing experience. They were like children, having done something that they've never done before. Here's me teaching the game of set to a group of middle school teachers. So eventually we realized that in order to be a good social entrepreneur, you have to be humble enough to iterate. Iterating means making small changes to your idea until it works. Long story short, it did not work to partner with Queen Ranya's organization. They were kind of a disaster logistically. So we parted ways with them after a year and began partnering directly with universities. We also learned that this curriculum was much more appropriate for college-level students than high school students. We developed private contracts with private universities to bring in a credit-bearing course. And soon we realized that we needed to recruit culturally and linguistically Arab facilitators of this curriculum, which is what we did. These were young women who had been raised in the West or had some form of Western education, so they understood intrinsically the type of education we wanted to offer to young people, but had cultural and linguistic fluency to be able to present this in a way that students could understand. This was our first staff of facilitators. We only had 4, and then we grew to a staff of 8, and it kind of went from there. It took a lot of tenacity. I have so many stories I could tell you about the crazy things that we went through to get this thing to go, and we don't have time for that, so I'll skip that. But eventually, this social enterprise became a full-blown NGO, a nonprofit with pretty significant funding. We were finalists for the Echoing Green competition, which is a global social entrepreneurship competition. We didn't win that. We did win a major grant from the Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation, which is another social entrepreneurship funder, and that helped us to build a real organization. And I don't know if there's a way. This is a link here. I'm not sure if there's anybody back there in AV, but if so, there's a video here that we could click. Just click the picture and it should take you to the link. So just scroll down and play that video. This gives you a sense of what we ultimately ended up with. From those humble beginnings of eating goat meat in the village, this is what we came to build.
favorite class from the course was when we learned about the empathy. I really never noted what people were feeling until I took the course. I started putting more attention into what people feel, walking in their shoes.
Opens up your mind to a whole new level and makes you think outside of the box. And I remember we did the activity where we had the squiggles. We had a weird picture and we had to make something out of it. It was really creative. Like, I've never done anything like it before.
I had started initiatives before, but they were like all failing. And finally, I started taking this class where every day they're walking with us step by step. Instead of just talking and telling us what we should do, they were actually helping us to find our goal, draw the solution, and really work on it. If you did fail, like I did many times, you can just keep going on, and it's not wrong to fail.
This is what we always complain about, but for the first time, I'm actually feeling like I'm doing something about this. Maybe, perhaps I could change something.
You actually get inspired. It gives you a motive to move on, move forward.
We're very close to out of time, but I will just end by saying this was an amazing and incredible experience, and a genuinely humbling experience. We were working with young people in Jordan during the rise of ISIS. And if you know anything about ISIS, you know that one of the #1 countries from which they were recruiting fighters was Jordan. And one of the universities we were working in is called Zarqa University. It was in the city of Zarqa, which was the home of al-Zarqawi, one of the founders of ISIS. We were literally working. I remember being in a room one time where young people were asked, how many of you have either been directly targeted or know someone who has been directly targeted for recruitment by ISIS? And every hand in the room went up. So we were very much on the front lines of it. Morphed from the Arab Spring into trying to fight to give young people a different vision of the future than what ISIS was offering. And the sad part of this story is that ultimately the terrorists won. There was a terrorist incident that happened not even on Jordanian soil. It was actually in Syria, but it was involving a Jordanian fighter that turned the country over, sort of militarized the country overnight. And it became unsafe for us to be hosting these 23, 24-year-olds that we had recruited from all over the world to be our facilitators. We begged our board of directors to allow us to stay long enough to finish out the semester so that these hundreds of kids who had been enrolled in our course would not go without credit. And they allowed us to do that, and then we had to quickly pack up and go home. And I think, not every social entrepreneurship story ends with some quantifiable success. And one of the biggest mistakes we made was that we failed to build up local leadership fast enough. If we had done that sooner, this would still be going today. But because we did not have a fully functional staff that could take it on in our absence, the curriculum is sitting in boxes in my attic right now, awaiting for the right opportunity to go back into the hands of these young people. And I think another mistake that we made was we really burned out. We gave this 110, 150% of everything that we had, and it meant that when the real challenge came, we were spent, and we had no fight left in us to keep this going. And so we didn't do it perfect, and we didn't do it right, but we had an amazing experience. And, I think that what we were able to do endures, mostly because we were aiming to equip a new generation of leaders in the country that we were working in. I have had girls who have graduated from our programs who have studied abroad in Europe, finished degrees, started local initiatives. We have facilitators who are now administrators of major nonprofits, who have gone on to get master's degrees and doctorates, who are advocates for Arab diaspora involvement in the Arab world. And ultimately, I think we were changed by the experience. We were really humbled by how complicated and hard it is to try to do something good in a really messy world. I would do it again in a heartbeat, but I think I would do it differently. And I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to get to know the Arab people, mostly because it gave me the opportunity to really fulfill that third goal of the Peace Corps, which is to come home to America and communicate to other people what it's really like in the Arab world, to the best of my knowledge. And I hope I've given you a little bit of a sense of what that was like. I've taken most of our time, and I apologize for that, but I'm happy to answer any questions that you have, and I really appreciate the chance to talk with you about this today. Thank you.
Thank you, Shaylyn. This is a really insightful and story. So many of us are trying to make a difference in the world, and here's one example of an attempt to do that I thought was very, very, very thoughtful. We have between 10 and 15 minutes for questions. If you do have a question, we have a microphone that will come around. We just ask you to introduce yourself. If you're a student, what do you study? Ask your question, and we'll conclude before 6 o'clock. So Shaylyn, come on up. Thanks.
Hello.
Hi.
My name is Nathaniel. I'm a neuroscience major with a minor in business. I have an interest in the Arabic world, and while listening to your presentation, I'm curious about what was the pattern of thought in the Arabic world before this program came?
Yeah, that's a really great question. Thank you. I think what we saw, so my husband and I are two different people, right? He's a behavioral scientist. He likes to think about behavior change and psychology. And so for him, what he really saw was that got under his skin the most was a really deterministic mindset about intelligence. So all the times we would be eating on the floor in people's living rooms, and they'd be talking about their kids, and they'd say, well, she's the smart one, he's the dumb one, and this guy's the screw up, right? And it would always just break our hearts a little bit, and the kids believed it, right? There was a really deterministic idea that you came into this world a certain way, and no matter how hard you tried, it wasn't going to change. And I would see that as well because I worked alongside a Jordanian teacher in the Jordanian classroom. So there'd come time that we'd give grades to our students, and oftentimes she wouldn't even look at the students' work. She would just grade them based upon her impression of how smart they were. And I was like horrified by this, right? It just broke my heart, because these young kids don't know that we're doing that behind the scenes. They take the assignment seriously, and they think that we're going to read it. And then they're so frustrated that they always get the same grade, no matter how hard they try. And so that determinism was really tough. And we taught mindset. Carol Dweck, mindset is now knit into like the whole American education system, right? But when we were teaching this, it was like a really new idea in psychology, the idea of growth mindset versus fixed mindset. So the first thing that we taught our students was growth mindset. And it was literally like, you mean I'm not born dumb? Like, it was like a watershed moment of like, anything is possible. And so those were really incredible to see those shifts. And those are things that like, I don't think that those are cultural values that we need to have any pause in attempting to destroy, right? And that was one thing that was really important to us, was that we were doing science-based interventions. That we were trying to be really thoughtful about, is this just an American culture intervention? Or is this like this is how the human brain really works kind of invention? And we really tried to stay on that side. And it helped us stay as culturally neutral as possible. We were, of course, probably naive about how culturally neutral we were actually being, but that was something. And then, of course, I'm a social science kind of person. I think a lot about how to change the world and about how to make democracy work. And so for me, it was fascinating to see these are technically democratic citizens, right, living in this country who have no sense that they have any part to play in the future of their communities. So that was what always bothered me, people know what their communities need. They'd sit and complain about it all the time, but they didn't have a sense that they could change it, or if they wanted to change it, how they would. And so we started to see the relationship between those two observations and built a curriculum that spoke both to the cultural determinism as well as that very underdeveloped sense of democratic citizenship.
Hi, I'm Scott. I'm studying economics and sociology. I was curious, as you've kind of looked back on these experiences and used them in your writing and communicated them to other people, what's something you've kind of learned over that time in sharing your experiences that has kind of changed, or how your experiences have influenced the way you communicate and share these with other people?
That's a really good question. I don't know that I've ever thought about that, so let me think. You know, for as much as I want to be a communicator on behalf of the Arab world, I think one thing that I've recognized over time is that actually what we need is Arabs to be communicators on behalf of the Arab world, right? And in a way, I'm placed well to kind of try to translate Arabness for an American audience, and that's an important role to play, right? But one thing that I really long for is more Arab voices telling Arab stories. And we're seeing that a little bit more. But I really, I think that's something that I've thought a lot about, how humbling it is to try and be someone who has to put into words what an entire culture is like. It's weird when you live in another country for a while. People ask you these weird questions like, did you like living in Jordan? That's probably the number one question that I get, because we lived in Jordan for 6 years. My daughter was born there. She spent the first 2 years of her life there. I mean, like, this was a significant part of our life. Did you like living in Jordan? And it's like, I don't know if there's an answer to that. It's like asking the question, do you like being an American? Like, it's like, how do I even start to answer that question? And so it made me realize, like, how simplistic the questions that we even ask are about other cultures, right? And so I've had to learn how to formulate nuanced answers to questions that are not nuanced. And so I think one thing is I wish there could be more Arab communicators, and I also wish that we would ask better questions as Americans.
Neil Millman, I'm an alumnus social geographer. I have been to Jordan. I hitchhiked through it, been to Petra.
Ooh,
lovely
cool.
country. I
Oh,
could
yeah.
spend years there myself.
Yeah.
I traveled through Syria as well before the conflict. My heart is broken by the tragedy that occurred over there. It's just, you can't really appreciate how bad it is until you know the people, you love the people, you care about the people, right?
Right.
As you obviously do. But I want to corroborate everything you've said, because I haven't heard a missed note the whole time.
Thank you.
My own journey parallels yours, except mine happened in Mexico for the last 20 years, working with communities much like yours, but poor communities, marginalized people, refugees or homeless people, and so on and so forth. So you've got to start with the youth. You've got to start with the youth if you want to change the world, and you addressed that this afternoon about it's not us oldies that's going to change the world, it's you guys here. You've got to take up the torch and make a difference in the world. But as a social entrepreneur, which I am, I have a nonprofit. I go to Mexico every year to do projects. But my concern, my mission is to help children at risk, which would be street kids, orphans, refugees like that. Kids that don't have the opportunity, as you were saying, to really discover who they are and develop themselves. So I look at it from the point of what is the prevalence of violence or child abuse in that community, in that culture, right? I see it in Mexican culture. I'm familiar with it. But for you and Jordan, how you were talking mostly about the older students, teenagers and things. But what about the younger kids, the marginalized, the ones with disabilities or whatever? Is there child abuse? How prevalent is it? How does the culture deal with it? How does the government deal with is it really covered over, or how do people deal with issues of child abuse?
That's a big question, and one that I don't have a whole lot of specific expertise on. I do know, so the Peace Corps has, at the time that I was serving, had one sector that the government had asked for help on, which was actually special education. Essentially, if you kind of imagine what it was like in the United States in the 1950s with regard toward disabled children, they were abused, marginalized, put in institutions, kept in the closet. I mean, that's pretty much what it's like in Jordan. And so there is a push to educate people and to educate teachers to have the skills. But there is a lot of abuse of disabled children because, we did that too 50 years ago because we didn't know any better, right? And so, and child abuse is very real. Jordan is Arab culture, sometimes I describe it like there's two cultures. There's the culture inside the house and there's the culture outside the house, and they're very separate. Public culture and private culture are very separated in the Arab world. And so oftentimes it's really hard to know what's going on in homes. Of course, I was friends with a lot of women, spent most of my time with women. And yeah, abuse is a really huge problem. And largely that centers around gender issues. It's hard to know how much more to say, but it is a huge problem, yes. Mm-hmm.
My name is Natalie. I'm an international relations major with a minor in global community impact. And I just was thinking a lot about how we're talking about solutionaries and the idea that there are people, youth, desperate to get the help they need or the push they need to become people that can make solutions. For us, I feel like most people here in this room, we're youth on the other end that are desperate to know how we can actually make a real impact without getting into the white savior complex. Mm-hmm. Your experience was very niche, and you found a need that happened to fit your skill set as someone that knows a lot about social work, and your husband who knew a lot about social behavior. What do you suggest for us who have lots of opportunities to learn lots of different skills? What skills or what is the most important things we can be doing right now to be prepared for those needs, to treat the needs as we see them in our careers?
Good question. I mean, there's no shortage of need, right? There's no shortage of problems, but you might have seen, and you see it here actually, the very first exercise that we did in the semester of our curriculum that was actually about social change, because the whole first semester was about cognitive stuff, getting to know yourself, understanding what you were capable of, right? And then those who felt like they wanted to take that to the next level and apply what they learned in their communities would take the second semester of the course. And this, the first activity we would do, we had these local graffiti artists create these huge canvases with a map of the world, right? And we would ask the students to come up and write on this map everything that they saw that was wrong with the world. Everything that they complain about, everything that they felt like they couldn't complain about, everything, and just get it out. And that was a really cathartic experience for a lot of these kids, right? And then in the same session, we would put another clean graffiti map of the world on the other side of the room. So imagine if this was the first one, we would put another one right over there. And we would say, now imagine a new world. Imagine that none of this exists. What does it look like when all these problems are gone? And that was a different kind of cathartic experience, right? Because sometimes youth aren't ever asked what they want the world to look like. They're so focused on fixing the problems that they don't get to envision what could be different. And then you saw in the video, we had these strings going between them, and we would create a bridge between the two worlds, and then we would create cards with each of the students' names, and they would become the planks on the bridge that got from one side to the other. And the biggest thing that we told these young people is the same thing that you guys need to do. You need to figure out which problem on that wall keeps you up at night. There's no shortage of problems to fix. But which one bothers you enough that you cannot stop chewing on it? You want to talk to everybody about it. You spend all your time in the dining hall going off about it. You just can't stop reading about it. That's your problem. And you may have the skills to help with it, but you probably don't right now. But I think what's more important is that. And for us, we didn't even know like Jordanian people existed. They were not in our mental map of the world before we went here, right? I mean, obviously we knew that they existed, but they didn't exist in our hearts or in our minds. And it really wasn't about them. What kept me up at night when I met them was just like how much was in them that they couldn't get out. And what could I give them that would give them some ways to get it out? And I just think that if you find your problem, sometimes the path to the solution will appear. And sometimes you are that path in ways that you don't even know going into it. And that was certainly the case for us.
Thank you, everyone. We really appreciate you being here. Special thanks to you, Shaylyn.
Absolutely.
So much wisdom. We appreciate it. One more time.
Thank you.